Hello fellow booktubers, my name is Lauren, you're watching Dreams Books Courage, and today we have a lot of books to talk about because I did not do a wrap up for the past few months. And so I just wanted to go ahead and review all the books in one video. So I have 13 books that I'm reviewing for you guys today, and I'll try to keep these reviews quick and concise as possible, but I'm not sure how much I'm going to be able to do that, since I have a history of not being so quick and concise on my reviews, but I will definitely try my best. So the first book that I have to review for you guys today is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and maybe a few of you have read it. It's not like that popular of a book or anything, but obviously this is a classic, a huge classic. Either you've read it or you need to read it because it is such a great book. Even though the plot seems kind of like one-dimensional, I would say, it's very hard to explain it because there's just so much going on, so much symbolism, so many amazing things happening within this novel. The main character of this book is named Nick Carraway, and he has recently moved to just outside of New York City, and he's made a bunch of rich friends, and a lot of things go down with those friends, and just a lot of stuff happens. But it's so much more than just what I'm saying because it's so hard to give this one such a quick and concise review. This book is everything, and I really feel like you should just go in it without knowing what it is about. It takes place in 1920s New York City, and if that doesn't tell you, I don't know what will, because that's such an awesome time period to me. I had to read this book for a class at university, and I ended up enjoying this book more than I did the first time, which is crazy. The first time I read this, I actually gave it 4 stars, which I think is crazy now looking back at it, because this time I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, which is what it definitely deserves. I love this book so much more the second time around. I don't know what was happening the first time around, but it just was so hard for me to get through, and maybe that's because I've read so much more since then. I read this book last year actually, and then I read it again this year, and just the change I've seen in how I analyze this book and how much I love it has been absolutely crazy. That's why I think it's really awesome to go back and reread books, because you get so much more out of them the second time, especially if they're classics like this one. This is one of my favorite books of all time, and I would definitely recommend that you read it if you have not, and maybe even reread it if you have read it already. As I said before, I give this one 5 out of 5 stars. The next novel is another one that I read for the same English class at university, and that novel is The Day of the Locust by Nathaniel West. And I feel like this book actually isn't talked about that much, not just on booktube, but in general, because I had never heard of it until I took this English class, but it is a classic. So obviously a lot of people have read this book, and so it's kind of crazy that I had not heard of it before. My copy is actually made up of 2 different books. We have The Day of the Locust, and then we have Miss Lonely Hearts. Because it is quite a short novel, I'm not even sure if it can be considered a novel, but this novel follows quite a few different characters. The main one being named Todd, but there are a lot of different characters, and they're all completely different people and very fleshed out characters. This takes place in Hollywood. I'm not sure exactly which decade it is, but I think it's near the beginning of whenever Hollywood started to become a huge thing, and the mecca of all that is movies. And this really follows a lot of that sort of thing, of making movies and being in movies and just different parts of that. Todd is a set designer, but there are other characters in here that are like actresses and directors and just a lot of that, so I felt like it was very interesting in that spectrum. I really enjoyed reading this way more than I thought I would. The way that Nathaniel West writes is very cartoonish, and so the characters seem very cartoonish, and this world seems a bit crazy, or actually a lot crazy. There are just so many things happening, and there's a lot of violence in this book, and you just kind of wouldn't expect all these events to go together in the way that they do. This novel is just really a masterpiece, and it's unlike anything I've ever read. I would definitely recommend that you pick this up, but only if you're older, because there are some like weird things that happen in this book, and also a lot of violence happens in this book, so if you're wary of those kind of things, then probably don't pick it up. But if you're okay with that stuff, I would definitely recommend it. This is probably the second weirdest book I've read behind Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, because that is also super weird. But even though I'm calling it weird, it is kind of like a lot of events that do happen, and all this stuff like has happened in different ways, except for kind of like the big climax of it. But it is such a great read. I would definitely recommend it, especially if you're looking for a classic that you feel like you can get into. And fun fact, one of the characters in this is named Homer Simpson, and that's actually where the name Homer Simpson came from for The Simpsons. So I think that's very interesting, although this Homer Simpson is very unlike the one that you probably know and love. Although I said that this book was a masterpiece, I felt like it was lacking in some ways, and the violence was a bit too much for me at times, so I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next novel that I read in February was actually for a different English class, but obviously still in university, and that one is Buffalo Bill, Last of the Great Scouts by Helen Cody Wetmore. And this book was actually written by Buffalo Bill's sister, and his real name was William Cody. I read this for an American West class, and it is definitely very Western, and I don't really like Westerns. I don't know why I took this class, but I did make it through. So as the title says, this book is a lot about Buffalo Bill and his life, as told from his sister's perspective. But obviously there are a lot of gaps because it's not told from like a biographer or someone who is very skilled in this area. And also it is very much so biased, like a lot of things were at this time period. So you just kind of have to go in it with the mind that this is going to be a biased work, and some of the things you read will definitely not be in your contemporary perspective of things. But it was an interesting biography. I've never read one so biased. And so I did find that to be interesting, and also to learn about Buffalo Bill's life because I really did not know that much about him. Basically, he formed this Wild West show, which is kind of like a carnival in a way, but it's kind of depicting the Wild West and what it became. And so there's like horse riding and different horse tricks in it, and Native Americans are in it. But it's just a huge thing, and this stuff all actually happened. And he just had a very interesting life. He was a Pony Express rider, he was in the Civil War, and he just went through a lot of stuff. I probably wouldn't read this again, maybe sometime in my lifetime, but probably not. But it was pretty well written, and it was interesting. It was okay to read it, but I wasn't like super interested. Like I just always felt like I needed to pick it up or anything like that. A lot of this book was very, very slow for me. I'm not interested in the Western for the most part. And so I did find it quite hard to get through this one, but it is pretty good if you want like a biased biography of what the American West was like, which really you can't find one that's not biased. I thought this one would be pretty interesting for that sort of sphere. So overall, it kind of dragged for me, but it was well written, so I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was also a kind of biography, and that is a memoir by Amy Poehler, which is of course Yes Please. And this is basically about Amy Poehler's life and just different facets of her life, from Saturday Night Live to her divorce, just like different things about her that have been both public and private and told in the witty way in which she speaks. I actually read this as an audiobook just because I wanted to hear Amy Poehler say all the funny stuff that she had to say, and I do think that it's better that way just because it is Amy Poehler and just hearing it out loud. But I would love to go through the actual book and just see the different pictures and stuff that I kind of missed out on by reading the audiobook, but it is a great audiobook. Amy Poehler obviously is a great narrator, and you really can hear all of her wit and everything come through by listening to it. This is actually my second time picking it up. The first time I didn't finish it. I don't know why. It's a great audiobook. I would definitely recommend you listen to it if you love people like Tina Fey and Mindy Kaling's audiobooks. Or also if you just love Amy Poehler's work and like anything she's done, which she's done so much, especially Parks and Recreation and Saturday Night Live. I just loved reading this and hearing more about Amy's personal life and also her public life, especially with Parks and Recreation, just because I love that show so much. This was definitely a great reprieve from the other heavier things that I've been reading recently, and obviously I just really enjoyed this one, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And the last thing that I read in the month of February was actually a graphic novel, and that is Saga Volume 1 by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, and I'm so happy that I finally read this one. I know that almost everyone raves about this book. If they've read it, then they definitely hype it up. And I would definitely say it lives up to the hype, although I was not able to give this one 5 stars. This was really good, and I can see that this is definitely building up to a much larger story. The main characters are the characters that are on the cover of this beautiful graphic novel, and it's kind of like a Romeo and Juliet situation in the way in which their planet and moon, they don't like each other at all. They're actually in an all-out war against each other. And these two run away and they end up having a baby together, and so they're basically being chased by the entire universe. There's definitely some mature content in this very early on, so if you're a little bit young for it or you don't think you can handle it, probably don't pick this up, but I'd say for the most part everyone would love this one. It's just so well done, and I can see that there's so much more that's going to happen within the series. I've only read the first one so far, but I'm so excited to continue on with the series. It's just such a great one, and I know that I'll be captivated as soon as I pick up another issue. This is just such a beautiful read, and the art style is so amazing, and especially the coloring is very well done as well. Definitely pick this comic book up if you have not yet. I feel like a lot of people would really enjoy this one, or if you're trying to get into comic books, I also feel like this is a really good place to start. I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. So those were the 5 books that I read in the month of February, and now for the month of March, which is my birthday month. And surprisingly, I only read 3 books in March, which is not as much as I thought I would, especially since I had spring break, but I feel like I had just a bit of a reading slump during that month. Anyways, the first thing that I managed to read in the month of March was on my Kindle, and that was actually more of a novella, and that was Never Never Part 3 by Colleen Hoover and Tarryn Fisher, and this was the conclusion of the Never Never kind of like trilogy thing. I have really loved this trilogy from the very beginning. It seems so different to me, and I just loved so many elements of it. For a quick summary of what the first novella is about, there's this couple and they wake up one day and they do not remember anything. They don't remember who they are, who their parents are, and most importantly, they don't remember who each other is. And so they're just kind of trying to struggle through life not knowing who they are at first. So obviously a lot of things are going on. This trilogy is really about figuring out who each other is and also figuring out what the big mystery is, why they both got amnesia, and what is causing all of this mess. So I love this trilogy in general, and I really like the writing styles of both Colleen Hoover and Tarryn Fisher. So I was really excited for this finale to this trilogy, and honestly I was very disappointed in what the big mystery was. It was just so anticlimactic, and it just seemed like an overplayed trope, and I don't want to go into too much detail if you haven't read this trilogy and you want to, but yeah, it just really felt very anticlimactic. But I did still love the story itself besides the ending. I just wish they had made it something bigger than what it was. Maybe if it was a novel they would change it, but I kind of feel like they wouldn't. Honestly, the ending just felt like such a cop-out to me, and I was quite disappointed in it. But overall, I still gave this one 4 out of 5 stars because I did love the writing style and the characters and all the other things about this trilogy. I just didn't really like how it ended up coming together. Next, we have Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison, which was, again, for one of my English classes at university. This is really a novel all about family and what family means and just all the things behind that. I really don't want to say too much about this one because I really feel like you should just go into it not knowing too much about what is happening because it's just such a beautiful read, and I just feel like it's so much more worthwhile when you go into it not knowing too much about it. But it is about an African American family, and it's just all about trying to find your own identity when you have had it taken from you. This is a deep novel, and you just really have to delve into it whenever you read it, but I think it's well worth it. I love this one so much. It was so rich in language and characters, and it really was not lacking in any sort of sphere. It was such a good read, and I just learned so much from it. And I just really love the topic of identity and finding your own identity. That's just such a relatable topic in so many ways, but especially when dealing with race and immigration and all these other things that were going on within this time period of about the 1980s and continue to go on today. I would highly recommend this read. It was so good, and it was just such a meaningful novel. This will probably go into my top books of 2016. I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend it to any of you trying to find a newer classic, even though I'm not sure if this can be considered a classic yet, but it definitely will be whenever it can be. It was just such an important read, and I would definitely recommend that all of you go out and read it. I ended up giving this one, obviously, 5 out of 5 stars. And the last novel that I read in the month of March was for my American West class, and that is The Virginian by Owen Wister. And I surprisingly really enjoyed this book. It's kind of a foundation for a lot of different Western themes and tropes, and it is quite a big book for me to read for it being a Western, but I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the characters and a lot of different things about it. This novel follows a character who goes by the name of the Virginian, and just different things that happen in a Western society within this time period. He's definitely the typical Western hero, and I think he's actually played by John Wayne in the movie of this, but if you ever want to get into Westerns, this is definitely the place to start. It is so well written, and I just really enjoyed it. And it's really crazy how it's just really about an ordinary life of a cowboy in the American West, but you can really just get so much from this novel, and also just there's so much story to be had within the American West, and just all the trials and tribulations they were facing at that time period are very true historically. I'm just so surprised at how much I enjoyed this one. It was so well written, and the story definitely keeps you engaged the entire time, so I would recommend this one if you're looking for a Western novel. I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. And now for the last month that I will be talking about within this video, and that is the month of April. I actually did quite a lot of heavy reading within this month because I just had so much that I had to read for class. All 5 of these novels were just for class because I just had that much to read. And the first of those novels is Blood Meridian, or The Evening Redness in the West, which is by Cormac McCarthy. And surprisingly, I did not read this from my American West class. I read it from my American Literary History class. But this is definitely more in the stem of Westerns. It takes place along the Texas-Mexico border in the 1850s, and it is definitely by far the bloodiest and goriest book that I've ever read. But many consider this to be Cormac McCarthy's best work, although he's had more popular works like The Road and also No Country for Old Men. But I could definitely see how this is his most important work. because of the writing style and all the themes throughout it. It's really hard to describe this book because there's basically no plot. There's not really supposed to be a plot in this novel. They're basically just slowly traveling to the west throughout it, just killing everyone, whether it be animal or a human, within their sights. And it is just such a violent book. It is definitely the most violent book I've ever read. But the writing style is so beautiful, so it's just a weird combination of the two. And it sounds very weird to say, but I ended up really enjoying this novel. It is just so well written. It's definitely one of the most well written novels I've ever read. And just the story itself is so well done because of how McCarthy writes. It's very hard for me to talk about this novel. I don't know why. Maybe it's the violence, or maybe it's because it has no plot. There's just so much that happens in this novel, but it seems like none of it matters to the characters, and like it shouldn't matter to the reader. So it's just very hard to talk about, but if you like McCarthy, definitely pick it up. Or if you like westerns and you're not afraid of bloodiness or goriness, you can pick this book up also, but definitely a heavy warning on violence in this novel. It's kind of like a main point to this novel is all the violence that happens, but I think it's really great, and it definitely sheds some light on like different perspectives that are not white. And so that's really awesome to have within a Western perspective. But I would definitely recommend this to most people, and I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next novel I read was also a Western, although this one actually was in my American West class. And that is Hondo by Louis L'Amour, who is definitely a huge Western author. I've actually read something by L'Amour before it, and that was The Walking Drum, and that is such a great novel. I would definitely recommend it. I can't remember what century it was in, but it was definitely a very, very long time ago, at least 500 years ago. And it was just such a well done novel, and the writing's amazing. And I would also say the writing is very good for this novel as well. L'Amour is just such a great writer, and I just really like his writing style. This is definitely more of the classic Western and the classic Western hero of Hondo Lane within this novel. And Hondo works for the military, but he's mainly more of like a spy for the military and spying on the Native Americans and trying to figure out what their plans are. Within this novel, it's specifically dealing with the Apache, and so it's pretty interesting to kind of see some of what might have been like the Apache ways, although this whole thing was obviously fabricated. And it definitely does not have to be anything close to historically accurate. I like the writing style, and I really liked this novel overall, but the one thing that I definitely did not like is that this was originally made into a novella by L'Amour, which is obviously fine. But then a movie production company actually bought the rights to it, and they made it into a movie called Hondo, and then they basically asked L'Amour to write a novel out of the screenplay for that movie. And so I feel like this isn't necessarily all of L'Amour's words, and it's more about whatever the movie production company wanted him to write. I really don't like that facet, although L'Amour's writing style overall is still amazing. That was just definitely a setback, although the story to this definitely keeps you engaged and really wanting to read more of it. I was definitely not happy to hear that it was based on a movie, basically. Even if he did write the original novella, a lot of the things were changed, and he basically wrote off of a screenplay for this novel. But anyways, I don't want to get too much into that. Obviously, I mostly like this besides that little fact, and I definitely wouldn't recommend this for especially your first L'Amour novel. I feel like The Walking Drum was definitely such an amazing and rich one, and this one just did not feel that way. So if you're looking to get into his writing, definitely go for The Walking Drum and not this one. But if you're a fan of L'Amour, this was definitely a really great novel with a great story, and overall I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. And the next Western that I had to read for class was Riders of the Purple Sage by Zane Grey, and I was not a big fan of this one. This is largely about Mormon culture, and it is very biased against Mormons. I myself am not a Mormon, but it just seemed very weird how biased it was against them. This is about a woman named Jane, and the Mormons want her to marry one of them. And she does not want to, but they're being horrible to her and just trying to steal her land and her cattle and everything from her. And then there's a man named Lassiter who hates Mormons, and he wants to kill them all, but Jane keeps him from doing that. And just a lot of different things going on within this. I'm not really saying that much about it. But basically, it's about Mormons just trying to fight non-Mormons. Although the writing style of this was very great, and Zane Grey is known for Westerns, I just didn't really like the story in general. The characters all fell flat for me, and the women especially could have been these amazing characters, but instead Grey made them into these complacent characters and just kind of passive. And I just didn't really like them the way that they were portrayed. Obviously you can blame that on the time period, but I don't think that's very fair. No matter what time period it is, I feel like you shouldn't have to excuse someone for the way in which they portray women. So there were definitely quite a few things that I didn't like about this. The characters were definitely a big downside for me, and also the plot was kind of lacking. But the writing style was really good, so I ended up giving this one a 3 out of 5 stars overall. The next thing that I read for class was actually a graphic novel, and I thought that was very interesting to read for a class. And that graphic novel was American Born Chinese by Jean Luen Yang. And the coloring for this graphic novel was done by Lark Pian. This novel is basically about this boy named Jin, and as the novel states, he is an American born Chinese. And so he was trying to struggle through the American public school system, but it's very hard for him being Chinese, with a majority of white students being around him, and those students not really respecting his culture or who he is. And the other main story within this is about a monkey king who wants to become immortal. And that might sound kind of crazy, but it's really not, especially within the story and within Chinese folklore. And just the way in which these stories wove together was really amazing. I would definitely recommend you picking this one up if you're interested in a deeper side of graphic novels. This one definitely deals with immigration in a great way, and I just really respected what Jean Luen Yang had to say. Although this is kind of juvenile because it's written for a more middle school audience, it's definitely worth a read still, and I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. And the last novel that I read this semester for class was No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy, which is kind of crazy to me that I read 2 McCarthys in 1 month, but they were both so good and definitely worth a read. I think I actually like this one more than Blood Meridian, although I know some people like Blood Meridian more. This one was definitely easier to read, and I just really enjoyed the story overall. The main plotline of this novel was about a man named Moss. He found a bunch of dead guys out in the middle of the desert and a briefcase full of money within it. And so basically the story is about him taking that briefcase and running away from both the police and also more dangerous forces. And it's just such a great novel. I'm really not doing it justice by my explanation of it, but there's just so much story within this and so much plotline. It is so well done. As I've said before, McCarthy's writing style is really amazing. I really enjoyed all the parallels that are throughout this novel. And the story is very much so a mystery, and that aspect definitely kept you wanting to read more. So if you have seen this movie or you're just really interested in McCarthy's works, then I would definitely recommend you checking this novel out. It's definitely better than the movie, although the movie is quite amazing. I really enjoyed the movie as well. But this was definitely a great read and one of my favorites that I read this semester. I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. So those are all the novels that I read in the past 3 months, and I think 13 is a pretty good number for 3 months. Honestly, I've just been so overwhelmed with reading for class that I just really haven't wanted to read for pleasure very often recently, and so I really haven't. And so I will not be having a May wrap-up, although I will be having a May and June wrap-up combined. I honestly haven't even finished 1 book in the month of May, although I might finish one. I'm not sure yet. But it's just been pretty crazy, and I've just been in a reading slump ever since finishing all of my school reading. But I definitely hope to read more since it is now summer, and I just have so many months of just filming and reading ahead of me. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and if you have not yet checked out my other channel, please do so. I just started it a couple days ago, and there are 2 videos on that channel right now. I'd really appreciate it if you check out that channel and subscribe if you enjoy my content. Thank you guys so much for watching these videos and supporting me, and now I'm gonna go get back to reading.